we're going to get started with our speakers in the formal presentation of our April meeting. And we are very fortunate to have Gil Duran with us from the Bay Area. Gil is a journalist based in San Francisco. He began his career at the San Jose Mercury News back when newsprint was still being used. I think many of us remember newspapers before they were online. In 2003, he transitioned into political communications, serving as a spokesperson and strategist for prominent figures such as Governor Jerry Brown, Senator Dianne Feinstein, Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, and Attorney General, I think you might have heard of her, Kamala Harris. He returned to journalism in 2018 as the California opinion editor for the Sacramento Bee, writing columns and editorials on local, state, and national issues. 2021, he became the editorial page editor of the San Francisco Examiner. Today, he writes for the FrameLab newsletter and the Nerd Reich. Great name. Great, the Nerd Reich, and regularly contributes to various publications, including The New Republic. So how about a warm welcome for Gil Duran? Gil, I know we are grateful to have you, so thank you for being here. Ted Lieu sends his regards. He was here last month and asked about you. And I want to start off the questions, Gil, before you go into your talk. There's a lot of news that's been happening this past week, and it seems like every day something new and depressing is coming out. And of course, the biggest story of all is Shedeur Sanders was not drafted until the 5th round in the NFL. So I think that's, we really want to get your comments on that as well. But Gil, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And do you have any opening comments that you'd like to talk about?
Well, sure. For the past few years, I've been paying close attention to the tech billionaires now dismantling our government. I've read their books. I've listened to their podcasts. They're very long podcast episodes. They really love to talk for long periods of time. And I've immersed myself in their ideas. And last year, I wrote a 5-part series on the subject for The New Republic. And if Kamala Harris had won the election, then it would look like I had gone down a very strange rabbit hole for no clear reason. Unfortunately, all of the stuff I wrote about last year, both the people, the ideas, and the actions, are now what we see unfolding in our government and in the news every day. And while the mainstream press mostly ignored this story last year, just wouldn't mention it, wouldn't talk about it, I'm now getting calls from reporters all over the country and all over the world asking me to provide them with some background. I think you're going to see a lot more of these ideas coming into the mainstream of basically what I call tech fascism. Some call tech authoritarianism. There are different names for it. But it's all the same idea, which is now melded with MAGA, the idea that democracy is outdated and it's time for authoritarian-style governments with billionaires in control. And that is where they have found this commonality with MAGA. So if you want, I mean, I can answer questions or I can talk. We can do it either way.
Gil, I'd like to know more about this because this is, as a tech hundredaire myself, I know that the tech billionaires have a huge outsize influence on the MAGA government right now. I'd like to talk more about that. And also in the mainstream media, the stories that we're seeing now are like tech billionaires have regrets. You know, they said how great Trump was going to be, and then with all the trade wars and the tariffs, now they're thinking, they made a bad, they backed the wrong horse. Are you hearing that now, or what are you seeing with the tech billionaires? Are they doubling down on this?
Well, I think they're doubling down. There are some people who are going to be queasy, some people not realizing that their interests would be directly harmed in the short term, at least. But you have to remember, this is about an authoritarian takeover of our government. I think Carol described it as a hostile takeover. And that is very much the case. The only reason these tech billionaires matter is because they have billions of dollars, and they have tremendous access to technology and other influential resources that they put behind Trump. And so now they want to get something out of that. And I think the important thing to understand is that this ideology that's taken shape in Silicon Valley, which some call the Dark Enlightenment, others call the neo-reactionary movement, others call it the network state, is very much predicated on the idea that democracies and nation states are outdated software and that they need to be replaced but a new system of government run by tech billionaires. That means replacing the dollar with crypto. It means replacing most of government with artificial intelligence systems under their control. And so when you look at their vision of the world, at the hardcore people behind this, not people who kind of have tagged along because Trump was going to win and they thought they'd get something out of it. There's a hardcore cell of individuals who are deeply into this ideology. And a lot of it traces back to a 1997 book called The Sovereign Individual. And it was written by two Oxford educated men, one of them a former journalist at the Financial Times and the Times of London. Another one was one of the first investors in Newsmax. And in 1997, they wrote this book, which said that in the 21st century, the information age would lead to a complete reduction in jobs, that basically technology would replace traditional jobs. And the lack of jobs would lead to a period of great instability, chaos, and violence. And at the same time, the rise of something they called cybercurrency would allow for rich people to undermine traditional government authority by hiding their money, thereby also sucking out revenues from existing governments. And they prophesied that this would lead to the collapse of nation states like the United States of America and most democratic countries, and the rise of a new form of government led by what they termed a cognitive elite. These are the super smart techies who are able to make their billions off of the new information age. And this sounds crazy, sounds apocalyptic, but in 2020, the book was reissued. And the preface to the book was written by Peter Thiel. And if you read that book and understand how crazy and how dark and apocalyptic it is, you have to remember that Peter Thiel has made billions of dollars off of our government with a surveillance software called Palantir and has tremendous influence over the current administration. The Bloomberg had a story a few weeks ago. All these Peter Thiel connected people are streaming into government as Elon Musk fires everybody. So I think that you have to understand that while not everybody may be a hardcore member of this ideological cult, that the men who are a part of it understand and expect the decline of the United States to enable the rise of their new fascist dream state. So I do think there are some divisions in the Republican Party. There are some people who are now realizing how tariffs work and how it's going to affect their own business interests. But I think that the fork in the road we're coming to is whether Trump intensifies his efforts to create authoritarianism in America, which recent events would suggest he is doing that with the arrest of the judge and the creation of these concentration camps in El Salvador, which he's threatening to send American citizens to soon. Or whether they start backing off because the poll numbers are sinking and because the economy is about to get very, very ugly because of the tariffs and other destructive actions that he's taken. And if you remember, Kamala Harris supposedly lost this election because of the price of eggs. Well, the price of everything is about to go up, and that's political suicide unless you don't really plan on being held accountable at the polls. And I think that's the question we have to face right now.
Yep. Gil, Carol had mentioned that there's ongoing efforts for massive voter suppression. Is that the only way that the Republicans can stay in office, besides calling off elections altogether?
Um, that's one way, right? They're looking for ways to do massive voter suppression based around this idea that we all have to, first it was you need IDs, now you need your birth certificate. Next, it'll be that you need to show that you're a registered member of the Republican Party to vote, right? They're playing all of these games, pushing the line on what's possible, testing out these ideas to see what the reaction is, jamming the courts with as many cases as possible to sort of make it impossible to litigate these things in a timely fashion. And I think the other thing we have to watch out for is the use of our government as a weapon of disinformation. They're going to start saying things that are not true from the government and forcing large percentages of Americans to believe them. Like, this is just speculation, this part on my part. But one of Trump's main obsessions was with the idea that the 2020 election was somehow stolen, which makes no sense. There's no proof of that. Joe Biden won fair and square. And if Democrats could somehow steal the 2020 election, they certainly would have taken the 2024 election because it was much more crucial to win this time, given Trump's complete turn toward authoritarianism. But I'm sure that, FBI Director Kash Patel and others will find some way to fabricate some kind of story that lends credence to Trump's false claims at some point. They're just getting started. We're just a few months in. So I expect them to really start, they're already doing it, call into question the integrity of our electoral system toward pressuring people to believe that elections actually have been completely unfair and don't matter, and that the only way to have a democracy is for Trump to win no matter what. We've seen this here in California, where every election, Trump claims he would have won California if it weren't for voter fraud, which we all know is laughably untrue given the Democratic registration in the state. But I think look for some flavor of this alternate reality, which is a key to fascism. You create an unreality where nobody knows what to believe anymore. And that unreality, that disinformation narrative against our electoral system will be driven by the main institutions of the government that we're supposed to trust and believe.
So, Gil, are you saying that Trump is not 6'3", 225 pounds, and the greatest physical specimen ever in the history of presidents?
It seems very unlikely.
Yes, for someone who's 5'10" or 5'11" and 280 pounds. So we're going to have a few questions now. We're going to go in order, but yes, go ahead. You and then I'll repeat the question too. Okay. All right. Okay, so Gil, the question was, is there a plan to stop all these hedge funds and these billionaires who are buying things like Jersey Mike's and 24-Hour Fitness and many homes across the country are now purchased by hedge funds. So isn't that a backdoor way for billionaires to take control of our economy?
Well, I would say they already purchased the United States government, and they've taken control of all of it right now. And I think that's the more imminent and urgent issue. I think we're definitely going to have to reckon with the role of billionaires in our society. To paraphrase Louis Brandeis, the Supreme Court justice, we can either have billionaires or we can have democracy, but apparently we can't have both because these billionaires have now set their sights on destroying democracy. And I'd ask, where are the billionaires standing up against Trump and standing up for democracy? Where are all the Silicon Valley people who are not fascists saying we can't do this, this is wrong? There's a tremendous amount of silence out there, and there are a lot of people who are willing to go along with whatever side wins. At the same time, these tariffs and other destructive things that Musk and Trump are doing to our government are very bad for business. Business needs certainty. Business needs a growing economy. And the idea of somehow reordering the world so that the United States is no longer a superpower and we are somehow a protectionist state where Americans are supposed to make their own iPhones is very dangerous to business. And so I do think there's a schism there. But even if we're able to defeat this particular version of tech authoritarianism, tech fascism, they have enough money to keep trying over and over and over again. And what we're seeing now is they're not just buying the Republican Party, they're also starting to buy some Democrats. This big crypto pack, Fairshake, that took out Sherrod Brown and that, spent, I think, over $10 million to damage Katie Porter last year, got Alyssa Slotkin and Ruben Gallego elected as well. And they seem like Democrats in every way, except they're really pro-crypto and really on the side of these tech guys and don't have anything bad to say about the destruction they're doing. In fact, a few weeks ago, Ruben Gallego was at a resort in Sedona, Arizona, partying with Mark Andreessen, one of the architects of Musk's Doge takeover of government. So we also have to be careful about how over time this tech money will also bleed into the Democratic political sphere and we'll start to get less opposition and lighter versions of what these guys want. But yes, unfettered capitalism, the amount of money these guys have, you would think they'd be happy. They're at the top of the hierarchy, right? No one has benefited more from American democracy than these billionaires who have made massive fortunes in this country.
Right.
And somehow they think they're owed more, and they're very angry.
Yeah. Connie, go ahead.
I love this topic. I'm obsessed with it. Tell us more about Curtis Yarvin, his role in this, and J.D. Vance.
Curtis Yarvin and J.D. Vance, what are their roles in this? Anything else, Connie? Okay, so those two individuals.
Okay, sure. One breaking news flash on Friday, JD Vance, the Vice President of the United States, who has like 5 million followers on Twitter, followed Curtis Yarvin on Twitter. For context, JD Vance only follows less than 1,200 people. So when someone of that stature follows Curtis Yarvin, that's an endorsement and an amplification. And the reason people wonder why he didn't follow him earlier is because Yarvin has only been on Twitter recently. So who is Curtis Yarvin? Curtis Yarvin is a San Francisco software programmer who in the early 2000s started writing these essays under the name Mencius Moldbug. They basically said that democracy is a failed idea and that what we really need is corporate dictatorship. And in a just world, he would just be some internet troll and nobody would know his name or need to deal with his ideas. But he gained the attention of Peter Thiel, who I mentioned earlier. And basically, if you look at Yarvin's ideas, they are very much in alignment with the dark apocalyptic vision of the book, The Sovereign Individual, which predicted the 21st century, the decline of nation states, and the rise of cryptocurrency. And so Peter Thiel becomes his benefactor, investing in his company, and Yarvin becomes known as the house philosopher of Peter Thiel. And so, Yarvin's idea has become known as the Dark Enlightenment or the neo-reactionary movement. And the basic idea is that democracy has failed, and what we need is a return to monarchy, corporate monarchy, with CEO kings ruling over society, like basically tech company dictators.
What
And
could possibly go wrong?
what could go wrong? In fact, in 2022, he was finally eventually outed as Curtis Yarvin after writing as Mencius Moldbug for many years. And in 2022, he updated his ideas to say that if Trump got reelected in 2024, what he should do is install a CEO to act as a dictator inside of the government and start dismantling the federal government and basically imposing a mass purge of civil servants. And sounds a lot like what actually Elon Musk has been doing with Dodge. I prefer to call it Dodge rather than Doge because it's, dodging democracy, dodging the law, dodging the Constitution. And so he updated his writings to say that. Now, the important thing to remember about Yarvin, again, we shouldn't have to pay attention to his ideas. There's no reason why any of us should have to know that name. But he was very important to Peter Thiel and then became very important to J.D. Vance, who is now our vice president. Here's the most important thing to understand about J.D. Vance, and I don't think there's been enough focus on this in the mainstream press, which has really, really failed miserably at this, but I think they'll soon catch up. J.D. Vance is largely a creation of Peter Thiel. At every step of J.D. Vance's career, Peter Thiel has been there to fund him, support him, and help him in any way possible. They first met when Thiel gave a speech at Yale Law School, where J.D. Vance was a student, and Vance was so impressed that he emailed Thiel, got a response saying, hey, come out to California sometime and visit. A few years later, Vance is working at Mithril Capital, a fund co-founded by Peter Thiel. He worked on his book, Hillbilly Elegy, while there, and when it was published, Peter Thiel wrote a blurb for the cover of the book. When Vance went back to Ohio to start his own fund, it was with help and support from Peter Thiel. When he decided to run for Senate, Thiel spent, I believe, more money than had ever been spent up to that date to get him elected to the Senate. And when Vance wanted to be on the ticket with Donald Trump, he had a big problem, which was that he had said a lot of bad things about Donald Trump. In fact, he had compared Trump to America's Hitler. And it was Peter Thiel who made the peace that allowed for Vance to be on the ticket. And so Vance has been quoting Yarvin for years. You can go back. There's a clip on YouTube, and I wrote about this yesterday on the Nerd Reich, my newsletter, where Vance is asked by a right-wing podcaster how to fix the deep state and the problems in government. And Vance says, well, there's this guy, Curtis Yarvin, and he goes on to spell out this need to purge government of anybody who's a Democrat, big D or small d, and to replace them with loyalists who will then serve only the president, who will basically be more like a dictator. Vance compared this to denazification or debothification, which was where we purged the governments of Germany and Iraq. And basically, here he is in 2021, quoting Yarvin, talking about the very idea that we now see playing out here. So that's an important thing to understand. And again, I feel like some of my fellow journalists have been very skeptical, very wary of this, but JD Vance went and followed Curtis Yarvin on Twitter on Friday. Well, the last thing I'll say about Yarvin, because there's a lot to unpack there. I could go on and on. And in fact, it was announced last week I'm writing a book that will be published by Simon and Schuster. It'll be called The Nerd Reich, Silicon Valley Fascism and the War on America. And a lot of this will be explained in greater detail there. But lately, Yarvin has been complaining that he thinks the Trump administration is going to fail because it's not being authoritarian enough. And he feels that Trump has to really get more destructive and move more quickly to dismantle the institutions of democracy, or it's going to fail and it's going to stall out. And the fact that J.D. Vance has now followed him at a period where Yarvin is preaching an intensified extremism shows that J.D. Vance is listening.
Gil, after listening to you, we've been serving coffee for a while, but I think we're going to go to hard liquor after all
Sorry.
this. And a woman over here had a question. Yes, go right ahead. Okay, so the first question is, what is the long-term outcome of the tech manipulation that we're seeing?
Long term?
You diffuse all the
Yeah,
data systems together and stealing our IRS information and things like that.
sure. Oh, it's about consolidating power and having complete totalitarian power over our data. Can you imagine having an AI system that has fed on all of the data in the United States, which is not just information about the United States, information about the entire world, right? And imagine this tool being in the hands of a private actor like Elon Musk, who has an unending quest for power. Musk is not the main thinker behind these ideas, but he's definitely a main character behind them. I read Walter Isaacson's biography of Musk. And it's really clear in that biography that Elon Musk considers himself the most important person in the history of the earth. And he believes that he is the savior of humanity, that only if Elon Musk gets to do whatever he wants to do will we be able to have billions and billions of humans in the future and become a multiplanetary species and defeat death and live on other planets, etc. So there's a very dangerous egomaniacal element to all of this as well. But long term, what they want is a government of, by, and for billionaires rather than of, by, and for the people. But it's not just about money. That's a big mistake a lot of people make, that it must be about money or about just getting rid of regulations. It is about power. It is about having absolute power. These men already have money. They have billions of dollars. There's nothing they can want that they can't have except absolute power. And that's what they're after. So, I mean, there's a lot of details one could go into about what's happening with the data, what they're doing. We don't even fully understand the extent to which their systems have infiltrated government or what power that will give them now or in the future. But ultimately, this is about having enough power and leverage over the country to control it.
Okay, great. And Susan, you had a question?
Capitulating to Trump's demands and agreeing to do, $1 billion worth of pro bono work, and what role do you think that plays, and what should law firms really be doing?
So a lot of law firms have capitulated, and how bad is that for democracy and the government and for America?
Oh, it's terrible. These people are moral cowards, and once we're past this, they're going to have to deal with a lifetime of shame that they were willing to bow down in the face of threats, that they were so scared that they just gave up on democracy. He's also doing this to universities, trying to shake them down, get people to agree with him, go along with whatever he wants. They're also trying to do this to judges, right? That's what the judge arrest was all about, make the judges afraid that if they defy Trump, they'll be trotted out in handcuffs. This is how authoritarians exercise power, to terrify other people, to scare other people into compliance. And the most important thing is to resist that, no matter what it costs. No matter what the cost, even if it costs people their lives, you have to resist. And if the American people, especially these elites who are already millionaires, who already have tremendous amounts of power, don't resist, then they make it harder for everyone else. But the good news is that people are resisting. People are taking to the streets, millions and millions of Americans in protests that continue to grow. And there's some research done by an academic, I forget her name at the moment, but it showed that historically, If 3.5% of a population are in the streets in protests, no authoritarian regime has withstood that kind of public pressure. 3.5%. I think we'll probably be able to get to 10 or 15% once the tariffs hit our economy. So we do have tremendous power. It's unfortunate that there are these cowardly institutions, but they will live the rest of their lives in shame once this threat is defeated. And, it's not just that they're giving up to protect themselves, it's the harm they do everyone else by modeling cowardice instead of courage.
Great. Thanks, Gil. We have a question over here. Go ahead. So what is the long-term plan for these technocrats when they're attacking universities and higher education? And then the member also asked about Stanford University and Silicon Valley.
Mhm. Oh, I think they do want to largely eradicate the university. They view it as a big danger, right? What is the right-wing attack on universities is that they somehow make students liberal, right? They produce progressives. Well, that's partly because when you get educated, you have a wider understanding of the world and maybe don't believe, it's hard to be MAGA and be highly educated. And unless you're rich and just playing along for the benefits you're getting from it. One of the things they call for in the part of this ideology they call the network state is the creation of parallel institutions, parallel government, parallel media. So you have these, fake news channels that pretend to be real news and really spread propaganda. Fox being a premium example of that. Newsmax and many others are now popping up to replace the media. We also saw in the last election that all these kind of right-wing podcast bros have become super important, and people who are not watching CNN or MSNBC or reading the New York Times or the LA Times are listening to these podcasts and getting all their ideas from these very dangerously inept and obtuse individuals who are spreading right-wing propaganda. Same thing with universities, right? They view universities as a danger because universities produce knowledge. They produce often objective knowledge, and they produce young people who are idealistic. And what they really want is for, I think you got to the point there, to control the ideology of people. They want universities that completely indoctrinate people in right-wing propaganda, who don't talk about the horrors of the past in any kind of critical way. You remember a lot of this started with this attack on critical race theory, which is just applying a lens of racial clarity to history, making sure we tell everyone's stories and understand fully the scope of what happened in the past. So yeah, they view the goal is to seize control of all the centers of power in democratic society. So that means universities, media, the law, the courtroom, the government itself. Law enforcement is another big one they talk about, basically pairing up with law enforcement, making sure law enforcement is a long-term part of their block. And so that's what I think the attack on universities is about. It's part of this attack on all of our institutions and making sure that you don't just control the politics right now, that you change minds, that you indoctrinate students so that you control the politics of the future as well.
Okay. Yes, quick question. Time for like 2 or 3 more. So what's the best strategy against these billionaires who seem to be the worst enemies we've ever faced?
Sure. Well, I think an important part of it is we got to tell people what's going on. People don't know what's happening. The mainstream press has largely failed to do its duty, and they've treated this like some internet oddity that they don't have to take seriously. And that's starting to change. Actually, in the past 2 weeks, I've gotten a lot of calls from reporters at mainstream papers who are now starting to work on projects to tell the story, to figure it out. And I give them information on background. Here's what you need to read. Here's how it all fits together, in my opinion. I wrote a 5-part series for the New Republic last year on this stuff. And like I said at the beginning, it would have seemed like a weird rabbit hole if Kamala had won. But unfortunately, everything I wrote about in there, every name I mentioned is now in play in Washington. So first, you got to tell people can't act if they don't know what's going on. And what's happening is our country's been seized by a small cult of billionaire-funded ideologues with a very specific and dangerous anti-American, anti-democracy ideology. And very few people have heard that or understand it. I find when people do understand it, they become very alarmed. But if you think it's just chaos or Trump making mistakes, and I think there's a tendency on the Democratic side to see Trump as a big buffoon. Trump's not a buffoon. He didn't become president twice by being a buffoon. He's the most dangerous political figure we've ever seen, and he has an evil genius that Democrats have not been able to defeat. To the other part of your question, I'd say the number one thing that matters most is to tell your friends and family about the stuff and what's happening. A lot of people get their information from friends and family because a lot of people are not tuning into the media anymore, or if they are, they're tuning into weird podcasts. The age of the NYT and MSNBC are flagging. And the other part of it is to show up to these protests, the Tesla takedown, the hands-off protests. Remember that number, 3.5%. It's really, really hard for authoritarians to stay in power when millions of people are filling the street. And the only way this is going to end, I'm convinced, is with tens of millions of Americans in the street on a regular basis demanding that we protect this country from this authoritarian takeover. So, I'd say get some comfortable shoes and be ready to join those marches. Showing up really matters because it shows other people that they have some strength, that they have some agency, that there's something that they can do. Authoritarians want people to be demoralized and scared and feel disconnected. So connect with people, stand up, and recruit others that you know.
So courage encourages more courage.
Definitely.
Okay. Tim? Tim does not need a microphone.
Yeah, I heard all of that. Well, the Nerd Reich is free to read, but paid subscribers do make my work possible. A few weeks ago, I was actually about to kind of throw in the towel on freelance writing and go get a job, which probably would have meant I would have had to be more quiet publicly. And then an agent called and I got a book deal. And so now I can write the book, which is kind of an amazing turn of events there. So I'd say, find writers who are writing about this stuff, support them. Another thing you can do is the journalists you do read, if you're a reader of the New York Times, the LA Times, write to the editors, write to the reporters, push them to cover this stuff. What I found is there are a lot of reporters who do want to write about it, but there are a lot of editors who are gatekeeping the story, not letting it be a thing. I think it's going to look really bad later that they did that. But, I think the most important thing right now is for people to understand what's going on. And look, I come from mainstream politics and mainstream journalism, right? I've written for newspapers. I learned in the classical way how to report stories. In politics, I didn't work on the radical left. I worked for mainstream politicians who got elected to big jobs. So I have a pretty high level of what's real and what's not. And it's not clear to me why these other people haven't tuned in yet. They will, as I said, you're about to read this stuff in major outlets. But I think putting pressure on those in charge to speak about it, the same thing for elected officials. If Democratic elected officials would talk about this stuff, it would force the media to talk about it. But Democratic elected officials are also avoiding the topic and keeping it very vague and superficial. Chris Murphy and Jamie Raskin come close, but they don't go all the way. And I don't know of any Californian talking about this stuff. And this thing came from California, to be clear. So I'd say push politicians to talk about it. When politicians talk about it, the media has to talk about it. And what I've heard from people is that Democratic establishment politicians who do know about it believe it's too esoteric to talk about. And unfortunately, it's not too esoteric to be carried out by these hardcore fascists in Washington. So there's a point at which you have to talk about it anyway. And I do think people can understand it. If people can understand the Manson family, they can understand tech fascism. If people can understand what Al-Qaeda is, they can understand the threat to democracy we now face, which is even greater than Al-Qaeda was capable of producing. I think people can understand. What they can't do is understand it if the people in charge won't talk about it. So I would say write your congressman, write your mayor, write your governor, and tell them they need to talk about this stuff because the time is running out. And again, it's going to look really weird later that all this happened, that they got this far, and that nobody talked about it first.
Okay, great. You had a question, sir? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yes. Okay. So Chile and Hong Kong, do they meet the 3.5% threshold? And what politicians around the world and domestically are talking about tech fascism?
I'm not sure on the exact percentages, but I think that the only recent protests that didn't meet that met the 3.5 and was more like 6 was Bahrain, and the government wasn't overthrown there. The academic who did that study adjusted it to say that in general, not always, is this the rule. I think a benefit we have over a place like Hong Kong is that we do have a democratic form of government. We have a lot of power in this country. When I'm out there and I see all the houses and all the businesses and all the buildings, a lot of people have invested a lot of money, and collectively we have a tremendous amount of wealth and influence and power. We're all very invested in the continuation of this country and this society. So I think we have a lot more power than we think. Remember, Kamala lost because a lot of Democrats just stayed home, right? Like we have a country where we can vote and people don't show up and don't vote. And there are many reasons for that. But we do have a tremendous amount of power. Others are like, well, we need a violent revolution. No, we just need to vote first. If we don't exhaust our democratic options, there's no other option that we need, as long as we're allowed to vote. So I think the 3.5 rule isn't a hard rule. It's just been a tendency in history, and I think we need a lot more than that. I think we need a much bigger. I don't think it's about meeting a small percentage and then the magic happens. I think this is going to take a real movement of people to protect this country, because everything we care about is on the line, and I wish it were not the case. But a lot of what Trump is doing doesn't make political sense, right? You don't damage the economy on purpose. No one does that. Everyone does the opposite, right? You don't start breaking the rule of law willy-nilly every other day, some new outrage, right? This is unprecedented, and that's because it's a serious danger to the country. They are very serious about it. And I think the quicker that we can make them feel that there will be a massive outpouring of opposition, that there'll be a massive pushback for democracy, the more likely we are to get them to back down. I mean, Trump's poll numbers are already sinking, right? I mean, that's why Elon has to pretend like he's not in Washington anymore, because he became so unpopular that it was untenable. There are still certain rules of politics in place. And the question is whether they're going to back down because they're sinking at the box office, or whether they're going to escalate, which will be the most dangerous period of all. If they continue to do unpopular things, as if there will be no consequences in the election, we have to increase the frequency and magnitude of our protests across every level. And the other big problem, too, is the Democratic Party has largely been hiding under a rock. As I mentioned earlier, there are some people talking about it: Chris Murphy, Jamie Raskin, and obviously AOC and Bernie Sanders are going all around the country speaking to packed auditoriums on their anti-oligarchy tour. And it's not clear to me why most Democrats aren't doing that. I think that the polls are really clear that Democrats want their leaders to fight back. Instead, you've seen a lot of silence and a lot of people trying to pretend like this is a normal time and we can just use the same old talking points and strategies to wait out the Republicans. I don't think we can wait out the Republicans. I think people have to act. And I think that the leaders who will rise up and become most important in the Democratic Party in the future are those who take a stand now and who understood very early on what this threat was.
Gil, Adam Schiff was on Bill Maher on Friday, and Bill Maher is, you can imagine what side he's on. He said the Democrats have a battle between purity and pragmatism. And he said the purists are the ones who are going to lose, and the pragmatists, and he was talking about John Fetterman and Gavin Newsom as being the pragmatist, but that's the way to go. But what is your feeling on that? Do we have to do both, or is there a real battle between the purists and the pragmatists?
Well, the purists are the fascists taking apart our government and destroying our economy.
Oh, no,
I think that Kamala Harris was plenty pragmatic, right?
Okay. Yes, what he was
Right.
saying is the purity people are like AOC and Bernie. And Bill
No,
was saying, oh, they can't win. We have to go back to the pragmatists like John Fetterman and Gavin Newsom.
polls show that AOC is a top contender for presidency in the 2028. So I don't know what polls they're looking at. Look, I really take exception to these arguments. If you notice, going to the middle always means going to the right. Being pragmatic always means going to the right, right? That's one of the main tactics of the right, is to define pragmatic and moderate and centrist as right wing. Anybody who is attacking Democrats right now for speaking out at a time when the Republican Party has gone full fascist is just playing a game. And Bill Maher is one of those people, right? He went to dinner with Trump. Trump was nice to him. That means maybe Trump's not so bad. He's just playing a game. And so I don't agree with that at all. I think that people want people to stand up. We never know what the future is. You can't base it on a poll. You can't predict it because of what happened last time. So I think it's very pragmatic to stand up for democracy. I think it's very pragmatic to stand up for the rights of people, be they immigrants, be they trans, be they people of color. That's what this country was built on: progress, moving forward, an extension of freedoms to more and more people over time. The purists are in the Republican Party who want to return to some white supremacist vision of the past where women stay home or can't vote because they don't have the same name that's on their birth certificate. So Bill Maher is not someone I respect at all. I would hope that everyone would stop watching him after his latest turn toward the far right. I'm not sure what they have on him, but it must be something.
Yeah, it appears. Yes, you have a question? Gil, what about members of the far right who have been silent? Are they being silent because their constituents want that, or they're just being compromised? So we're, the Chuck Grassleys of the world, the Marge, Bobo, those sorts. What about that?
Oh, I think they're all in favor of it. I think a Grassley might be nervous about what's going to happen if it fails, But no, I think what's happening here is there's been an alliance formed between the traditional far right powers at the Republican base and the MAGA cult and the tech fascists as well, right? And so they may not agree on every single thing, but the way that the right wing works, they sort of have to line up behind their leader. And of course, as we know, as Democrats, it's harder to do that. We're cacophonous. We disagree. We want to debate it out on our own side. And these guys are sort of marching in lockstep. They're going to go wherever Trump goes. And if he fails, they'll pretend later like they didn't support it or were quietly against it. So will a lot of people in the business world who have remained ominously silent. So I think that
Okay.
yeah, they're not they're going to be in lockstep. There are some divisions that may take shape over the next year if the poll numbers continue to go down. There's a general rule in politics: if you get below 30%, you can't really govern anymore. And looks like Trump's heading in that direction.
Okay. Yeah, we hope. Yes, you had a question? Oh, I'm sorry, Bob first, and then you. Go ahead, Bob. You had a question?
Just curiosity. So, how does the pronatalism play into the big picture? Is it purely a racist play, or is there some political motivation?
So pro-nativism, the natalism.
Legalism.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. I heard that.
And Bob, the specific question: how does it play into this?
Yeah. One of the 10 keys of fascism is to always play up concerns around gender and sexuality. So on one level, the pronatalism is about the woman's role in society should be to have children, right? You got to stay home and have kids because we need more children. And so the idea that women should not have careers or that they should be mostly focused on that, the emphasis on pronatalism on one level is about maintaining a gendered social order where men are on top and women have a traditional role of staying home. Another level is the white supremacist level of it, right? If we wanted to solve our population problem, then we have lots of people who want to come here and be Americans, right? From Catholic countries, where my relatives came from Mexico. A lot of people want to come here, live here, and they'll be future Americans, and they'll have children, and won't have a population problem. We won't have a labor shortage. But they don't want those kinds of people, right? This is a very specific, racially coded, really eugenicist message about who should have children. This is why Elon Musk is trying to have as many children as possible with as many women as possible. He thinks he has a superior spawn. And so, yeah, it's a really weird thing. Most scientists would say the Earth is overpopulated. We are living in an era of climate change. We're facing future water shortages, all kinds of problems due to our population. And these guys are screaming about the need for everybody to have a bunch of babies. Not to mention the fact that I think more people would have children if our economy were such that they could buy a house and have a comfortable living and not live in fear of being in poverty with their children. But the same people preaching the need to have more children are also doing everything they can to make it harder and harder for middle class people and working class people to survive in this country. So there are a lot of things that don't make sense and don't add up unless you consider the fact that they're talking about people like them having children, not other people having children. So yeah, I think it's about sexism, fascism, hierarchy, and white supremacy, which are kind of all the same thing in the end.
Gil, just so people can know, if they want to get in touch with you now, if they want more reading about you now, besides going to the New Republic for your 5-part series, which I'm going to do tonight, how do they sign up for the Nerd Reich, and how do they find more of your writing?
Yeah, you can go to the nerdreich.com. It's free to read. Paying is completely voluntary. I'm also on Blue Sky at gilduran.com. And, thanks for inviting me. It's been, last year I spent a lot of time in obscurity, wondering why I was reading all this weird stuff and trying to write these stories. And, there's a lot of doubt in the freelance world because, you never have another paycheck coming. And so it's really gratifying that people are hearing about this, that people are interested in learning about it, and that I didn't waste my time. I just made an investment in the future. So thank you. And
Yeah, no, we still have time for more questions.
oh, you have more questions? Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I'm glad to promote your great writing. Yes, you had a question, and then you're next. So what do we do about the freedom of the press and journalists having to be afraid of Trump and
Yeah.
Captain Patel
Well, traditionally,
and his infiltration of the media?
yeah, that's a big part of it, the infiltration of the media. And it's like we were talking about earlier with the law firms and others. You have to be brave. I mean, traditionally, historically, journalism is at times a dangerous profession. We lived through a period of time where that hasn't been the case. I think the last murder of a journalist was 1976. A journalist in Arizona was murdered by a car bomb. But in countries like uh, Mexico and Russia, journalists are killed at a pretty high rate for just covering local politics and things like that, right? Journalism by those who want power, journalists is viewed as a threat. So when you become a journalist, the whole idea is you want to be brave, you want to stand up to powerful interests. That's the idea you have when you're young and learning to be a journalist. That's an important thing to be. And unfortunately, we do live in a time where these are not ordinary times and where we have to be braver. And at this point, I don't feel any fear of physical violence. I mean, it's always the case in the United States that something bad could happen like that. But the sooner that journalists act brave and with courage to push back, the more safe we'll be. If people demonstrate this cowardice, as we've seen from some of these law firms, and as we're seeing, by the way, with a lot of the coverage of the Trump administration, you can read the New York Times and not get the idea that this is something fascist and authoritarian going on. The language, I think it was George Orwell who noted, the language with which newspapers tell stories makes everything seem normal, right? You're not as alarmed as you should be because it sounds very routine, the description. And I think that the opinion journalists have really failed to capture what's going on for the most part. I think that will change as this becomes more alarming and extreme. But I think that journalism's fate is largely in their own hands if they don't realize that you cannot be objective in the face of fascism, in the face of fascism and authoritarianism. You have to stand up. You have a role, in being pro-democracy. Being objective doesn't mean it's okay if fascism wins, because if fascism wins, there's no longer any journalism. There's no longer any truth. So I think journalists have this fantasy world sometimes where they do not have to take a side in political issues. And that makes sense in certain campaigns and things like that. But when it comes down to the fate of democracy, you have to take a side. And so I do think we're going to see a bit more pushback in the future. I just hope it's not too late, because ultimately the goal is to weaken journalism as an institution and replace it with fake forms of journalism that have a much wider reach and are very well funded by people who don't necessarily want to make money off of newspapers, but want the power that media outlets have, and they're willing to pay for it.
Great. You had a question? So, in your book, what should happen after the midterms? Because there's Yeah, there's a lot of executive orders. Will they be overturned, and or will it be too late, even if we get back Congress?
Well, getting back Congress is only one step. We still won't have the White House. So, I mean, it'll be an important step. Then there will be some kind of break, hopefully, on the Trump administration. Not totally clear all the times with some of these Democrats who seem to think that maybe if we're nice to Trump, he'll do better, right? This has been a game we've seen him play for a long time. And it's kind of like in Peanuts with Lucy and the football. Every time you think Trump's going to be nice or do better, he does something, he pulls the ball away. So I think that, to that question, we're going to have to at some point reckon with the role of these billionaires in our society. And it's not going to be easy because do have a lot of Democrats taking money from these billionaires as well. And they are not going to take on their benefactors. It's going to be very hard to bring about that change. And so when people say that, oh, you have to be pragmatic and not be like AOC, it means, well, let's not upset the oligarchic order that Democrats also enjoy in their campaigns. I spend a lot of time in politics. A lot of politicians' job is to call rich people all day and get donations. And so it's really a big ask to challenge that power. But I think Democrats are going to have to find a way to do that. That's why I think that people like Bernie and AOC, whom I don't agree with on everything, are on the right track, because over time, these billionaires are going to win if everybody wants their money and has to do their bidding. And I have been a big fan of Adam Schiff. In fact, his chief of staff started as my intern on Capitol Hill in Senator Feinstein's office. But Adam Schiff is a crypto Democrat. He's totally pro-crypto, takes their money, got the benefit of that $10 million spend against Katie Porter. I'm not saying that's necessarily Adam Schiff's fault, but we do see that these tech guys, even the ones on the far right wing, and believe me, Coinbase, which is behind that Fair Shake PAC, is the far right wing, have seen the value in also investing in Democrats. So it's not going to be so easy to tell Democratic politicians that they have to be against the billionaires who are also funding their campaign. So it is something we have to do something about. It's something I will deal with in the book. But again, it's not just the Republicans who are going to be the problem. These guys understand the power of buying both sides, and they have the money to do that.
You had a question, and then you're next. Are you familiar with the C Street and the Family, the book?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, the fundamentalist power. What can we do about that?
Well, I mean, it's all sort of become one thing, right? The fundamentalist evangelical religious power. You've got some Opus Dei elements in there. Now you've got the tech fascists who are also sort of starting to talk more about their project in terms of religion. So there's been this alliance made. And again, I think we need to expose to people what's going on, what they are. A lot of people don't know about C Street and the Family. It's a very inside the Beltway thing, right? People need to understand that we have small groups of people attempting to orient our government to serve the few rather than the many. And so ultimately, that's going to take waking up this generation of Americans to the threat that we face and the need to be very active and engaged citizens. And that, in order to save our country this time, we don't need to storm the beaches at Normandy. We just need to go and vote in massive numbers and establish really a sane majority in all of our centers of power. So I think that a lot of people will be wakened up to the threat. Last year polls showed that a lot of people were going toward Trump. Latinos were going toward Trump, young people. Now the polls have all reversed themselves because people have gotten a taste of what that means. So whatever they were perceiving as that reality, whatever they were dreaming would happen under Trump, this has been the opposite of that. So there'll be a big opportunity for a realignment. But we'll have to really take advantage of that and push our leaders to go as far as possible. That's why I'm really focused on the root causes of this, the ideology, the money that enables it. And someone mentioned it earlier, we did have much higher tax rates in the past, and it's been a huge Republican project to get rid of those tax rates and lower taxes on the wealthy. That's pretty much the heart of the Republican ideology these days. And I think what we need is something like a French Revolution, but with taxes instead of guillotines.
Um, Gil, you had mentioned Hispanics and black males, and there was a governor, not a governor, a mayor, Muslim mayor in Michigan that was a big Trump supporter. You had Latinos for Trump in South Florida, where I'm from, that are heavily, heavily for Trump. How did he convince Latinos for Trump and Muslims for Trump and some of the largest percentage of African American males to vote for him last time? I mean, how was that even possible?
Well, the right wing has really been targeting men with these messages of male power and hierarchy. I do a lot of work with George Lakoff, the cognitive scientist who wrote Don't Think of an Elephant. And a lot of what they've been using to appeal to these men has been what Lakoff calls strict father ideology. And that's the family metaphor of politics, that everything should be run by a man on the top. His word should be law, and he should be the boss of everything. And everyone else is below him in the hierarchy. And a lot of men are raised in families or in cultures where this is also the case, or where they aspire to have that kind of power. And so by speaking to these men through podcasts, through media, and imposing this sort of strict fatherly ideology, the idea that a leader should be strong, a leader should be a man, a leader should, do outrageous things to show his power. I think that has operated on a lot of minds and had an effect. And because Democrats typically don't understand this deeper level of framing and don't engage in it overtly, they've been very defenseless against it. And I think we saw the ramifications of that in the last elections. But I think that what's happening now and everybody being in fear of the economy and a recession is coming has scared a lot of people and woken them up. They realize this isn't some game. This isn't a TV show. This is your life. When a massive recession hits, you're going to suffer. Your family is going to suffer. And so I think we do need to be aware in the future of the degree to which these deeper messages targeting men along the lines of gender hierarchies and other culture war issues have been very effective. And we're going to have to find a way to account for that and to reach these people with a different model of politics that is more inclusive, more nurturant, and actually better for their own self-interest in the end.
Great, Gil. I just want to thank you. You've probably gone over for time for yourself, and I'm extremely, extremely grateful for this. But once again, please tell us how we can get in contact with you, how we can sign up for your newsletter, and how we can contribute to your fantastic journalism.
Sure, you can find me on Blue Sky or at Twitter at Gil Duran, and the nerdreich.com. It's easy to just sign up. Then you'll just get my emails when I write something. And yeah, and feel free to become a paid subscriber if you want. I'm going to add regular Zooms there to keep in touch with people as I write my book, which after this week, I'm going to just kind of disappear and write a book. So you guys caught me right at the end of my ability to do appearances in public. So because I have to write it really fast.
What?
Huh?
Connie had a question? Go ahead.
I subscribe at a paid level, and I want to challenge everybody else in the room to do the same.
Absolutely. All right. So Connie and myself
Thank you.
so far, and then we'll get some more by the end of the night. Okay. Great. Thank you so much, Gil. You have been fantastic. We are in your debt, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. Bye.
Yeah.